As a 5-year-old child on my home reservation, I was kidnapped, I was abducted, faced a lot of horrific things in that episode. And so there was issues in my life of pain and hurt and so on. And how do you get healed from a horrific experience like that? I found Jesus to be sufficient.
God's the one that made me Indian. He wants to be glorified by that. Well, what's the best way to glorify Him? Since I was already in ministry and an ordained minister, I thought to start serving my people.
We see that a lot of devastation among our native tribes because they don't get through one tragedy when there's another one. If it's not against you, it's against someone in your community, a relative. And so they don't know what wholeness is. They don't know what hope is. And they just get bogged down with that. And that can be an awesome time when we can share our stories of hope with people.
I prayed to my Lord Jesus Christ, and He supplies my needs. And He heals me. I'm in a good health, and I want my relatives to know Jesus and come to Him.
God is moving in the hearts of people. God is moving, and we're going to see victories. I can name you numerous names of people who we've worked with that have come to Christ, have got rid of the alcohol, got rid of the drugs.
So it wasn't until 21, after spending some time in the Los Angeles County Jail, that I began to reflect on my life and basically came to the realization that what led me there to the jail was my life choices. So I didn't blame anybody, I was blaming myself. And so I thought, well, if I don't want to return back to jail and lose all my freedom, then I'm going to have to make some different choices of life, but didn't know how to go about doing that. And so I gave a lot of thought to it. And when it came time for me to be released, then that was still in the forefront of my thinking. And what happened is my roommate at the time, somebody had shared the gospel message with him, and he became a Christian. So when I got home from spending time in jail, then he shared that with me, and I said, well, tell me, I want to become one too. So I was just ripe for the picking when it came to salvation. And of course, received Christ.
I struggled with alcohol. And it was beginning to erode away my respect as a leader. And there was also, at that time, there was some medicine men or shaman that came down from Canada that actually, and I believed in that. I didn't want nothing to do with the gospel or Christianity, even though when I was a little boy, I went to a Sunday school on the reservation. And so I was opposed to this white man's gospel, and I despised it. And when I was, this, what I called witchcraft was used on me. It was very real, and it was only through the power of Christ, that my only source, through my mother's prayers and other people in our community praying for me, that I had a relief and break from that. Did it break from me for my being Indian? No. God made me into the man who He wanted to be as a follower of Christ.
You know, it's interesting because my testimony had a lot to do with drugs and alcohol, but those were never the things that I were. Those were the things that I was doing to hide a lot of pain in my life, to deal with a lot of just issues that I had. Who was I before I knew Christ? I don't know. I don't know who I was. That was the problem, is that I was searching to find out who I was. I had no clue. It was some huge identity issues in my life. I searched everywhere to find out what I was, and I couldn't find it. Who am I after I found Christ? It's easy. I'm a child of God. And I think the key awakening for me was finding out that I am a native child of God.
Well, I am a fifth-generation follower of Christ among my family. And my tribe, my dad comes from Niagara Falls, New York, which he is a Mohawk Indian. And my mother is Kiowa from Oklahoma. And I can actually go back to my great-great-great-grandfather, which his name was Split the Skies. And he was one of the first Mohawk chiefs to ever embrace Christ into his life. So my life, ever since I've been a little boy, is we have worked with Native peoples in sharing Christ. And not only among our people, but from Alaska right down to South America. And so there was a time in my life, of course, where I had to acknowledge that it was not my father or grandfather that got me into the presence of the Lord, but it was me that I needed to come to know the Lord and just totally trust Him. And so what was life like before I was a Christian? I was very much involved in sharing Christ with our Native people. And I would say it was a moment to realize that it wasn't everything that I did, what I said about Christ, but it was the fact, do I know Him face to face? And the truth of that hit me. I didn't. And so that's when I asked Christ into my life.
My parents have been actively involved in missions for many, many years. And I was raised on many different reservations, and I'm Navajo. And when I was 5 years old, my parents, we were attending a wake of a Sioux Indian child, and it was a great opportunity for my parents to open up the gospel to me, and it really hit me, especially looking at a 5-year-old in a casket and realizing that, the brevity of life, even as a child, you don't think you're going to be looking at yourself, a child your age, and you think life goes on and on and on, like the old people. And when they go, you think that that's more natural. So it was a perfect time for my parents to introduce Christ to me. So I accepted Him when I was 5 years old.
Unlike many Native people, I was born and raised in a Christian home. In fact, it was my grandparents who had become some of the first Chippewa Indians to come to Jesus Christ many years ago. They raised my father and his sister in a Christian home, and my dad raised my 4 brothers and I in a Christian home. So I was exposed to the gospel, ever since I was a child. But when I was 13 years old, I made a commitment to Jesus Christ. That's when He transformed my life, and He saved me. He changed my life.
My home experienced physical, sexual abuse. We were not taken care of. I was then placed in a white home about an hour away, and my needs were so great, both physiologically and psychologically, that they decided that they couldn't handle that. I was then transferred to another non-Native home. I grew up in a very strong Christian German home, so there were a lot of rules, a lot of expectations that I had to live up to, and I had that cultural struggle of really not knowing who I was in this white world, and still wanting to be Native. And I found that I didn't turn to the alcohol side of life or the promiscuousness or other addictive behaviors, but I discovered that I had an eating disorder about 10 years ago, and it was about a 7-year struggle. It was an internal struggle. I did go through treatment for it at Meyer Clinic, and but it was really there that I really realized who I was in Christ, how God was able to redeem all that I had been through. That was a pivotal point in my journey.
I had walked away from the Lord for a brief time because there were things that had happened earlier in my life as a child that at that point I just kind of, I really believe the enemy took and used a lot of those experiences to really work on my mind and in my heart and made me bitter. When I was 19, I just, after knowing the Lord for all those years and studying His Word, I just said, Lord, I'm so very miserable. I know what a Christian is supposed to be, but I'm not living it, and I feel like somebody with no hope in my life. And you know, I knew I had Christ in my life. I knew He was there, but it was what Jeremiah 29, 11, 12, and 13, and these are verses that I had never heard of before, that He gave me that night as I was on my knees in a dorm, all by myself, and I cried out to the Lord, and He's led me to these verses in Jeremiah 29, 11, 12, and 13. For I know my thoughts toward you, thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you an expected end. But you will find me when you call out to me and you give me all of you. That's my paraphrase version of Jeremiah 29, 11, 12, and 13. But I tell you, that's when I knew there was the word hope was in full meaning.
The journey, as a 5-year-old child on my home reservation, I was kidnapped. I was abducted, faced a lot of horrific things in that episode, and so there was issues in my life of pain and hurt and so on. And how do you get healed from a horrific experience like that? I found Jesus to be sufficient in His work in my life. Complete healing, complete forgiveness, and He's restoring me. He restored me as a young person, as a teenager. When I surrendered my life to Him, that's the difference He makes.
Basically what we're doing is helping Native people understand and embrace their God-given identity, so then they can begin to live out their purpose in life. And so it's helping them to become free from the dysfunctions and addictions of life in order for them to live victorious. And so right now we're located in southwest Colorado on the Southern Indian Reservation. And that's kind of our home base, and we work out of our office, and we get contacted by various ministries that are working with Native people in order to train their leadership so that they can effectively help the Native people.
I joined Navigators as a part-time associate staff, and I told them this is where I feel like God's leading me. And Navigators are very much into the ministry discipleship getting involved in people's lives.
God called my wife Sheila and I into the ministry back in 1988. And since that time we've been working. I was in Minneapolis primarily with chronic alcoholics, the forgotten people, the people that no one felt there was hope for. And we would work with the homeless people who were in the camps, the homeless camps. We had the highest homeless population in the Twin Cities, yet nothing was being done with them. We had a lot of deaths of people dying on the streets, freezing to death, being beaten to death, hit by cars. And we would go to the camps and bring food, and we had our first crusade there in the heart of the Indian community in Minneapolis. We called it Victory on the Avenue.
For 6 years, my wife and I traveled with a team of Native young people that shared the gospel peer-to-peer and among Native youth. So here's a Native youth reaching a Native youth with the gospel. And in those 6 years, we saw almost 6,500 Native young people come to faith in Jesus Christ.
My husband and I are involved in evangelism. As of, for many, many years, we've been involved in church planning and evangelism. But as of the first of this year, we are with tribal rescue training under the Christian and Missionary Alliance. But we go anywhere, and it's an equipping ministry to help everyday believers reach out to their peers and people in their tribes.
What we have launched with Tribal Rescue Training is taking this training that we equip these Native youth with, taking it to the church locally and equipping everyday believers, red, yellow, black, and white, in identifying who their tribes are and how do you convey the gospel through your relationships.
I am the president of an organization called CHIEF, Christian Hope Indian Eskimo Fellowship. And as mentioned before, it was my father really was the founder of that. The whole ministry of CHIEF is really to strengthen the Native church. And we do it through 3 different ways. We do it through evangelism. We go out to communities all over the country sharing Christ. And as Native people, we are involved in sharing to Native people. Another area was discipleship training. And we work with Native churches, over 3,000 Native churches across the country. And I would say that is the greatest need today.
God gave us a new direction to go in, and now we have a treatment center for Native people called First Nations Recovery Center, because alcohol has devastated the Native families and social structure of many, many Native communities. There's progress on the reservations, yes. There's things that are happening, but at the same time, there's also a balance of destruction and destroyed lives.
LYNN Ministries initiated in Seattle 60 years ago as Marine Medical Mission. We bought a minesweeper, World War II minesweeper, converted it to a hospital boat, and went up the coast from Seattle to Washington, back by Washington up through Canada and up to Alaska, ministering to Native communities along the coast. Isolated, no other way to get there but airplane or boat. And about 20 years later, we realized the need for resident missionaries, people living among the people. And so we became North America Indian Mission, and recently become North America Indigenous Ministries.
My heart's desire is to return to the place where God made such an impact in my life, and that is to work with Native American children, to teach them, and to clearly be that voice with those that have no voice.
I lived with sexual abuse from a very early age, and it came throughout my whole childhood. I had nobody protecting me. And this is not a sob story. This is just reality of what the Father has brought me out of. And so as a daughter being raised up in a family where my father was gone 12, 14 hours a day, my mother died when I was 13 of cancer and diabetes and crippling arthritis and emphysema. So at 46 years old, she left behind 12 children, and I was the oldest girl at home. So I became mama to a lot of little kids. Now, that was really, really crazy, but I'm really thankful for that training that God gave me, because we never understand when we're growing up all the pain and the suffering that we go through. It's every bit of it. God is not only able to use, but He wants to use it. Well, right now we have recently sold everything that we own, and we are living in a prayer room in Mechanicsville, Virginia, as a home base for us to travel and to do all that God has called us to do. And basically what He's called us to do is to travel to different Indian reservations and different communities, bringing the hope of our Creator.
We are presenting who Yeshua is in a native, practical way, so that everyone that is native can realize that they can worship and serve the Creator and His Son, the Peacemaker, the way they are, the way they were created.
Somebody has to stand up for the Native Americans, and I would stand up for them even if I'm not Native American. I would stand up for them because the injustices must be spoken about. Massacres throughout history, throughout this land, needs to be addressed so the land can be healed, because that blood cries out still, the blood of the ancestors that died on top of Wounded Knee. What Holy Spirit is doing is He's allowing those of us, the bride of Christ, that hear, to stand up and say, that's enough. Justice must come. And if I'm the first one to say, please forgive us as Europeans for what we've done to the Native Americans, then I'm going to speak it. So we're trying to bring awareness to those things. We bring food, we bring clothes, we do everything we can to try to help them. And Native Americans, wherever God opens up the door for us to do that.
My brother-in-law was telling me and reading me the Bible, and I know I don't have nowhere to go for church, and I don't believe in nothing, but when he told me about baptisms and about Jesus and that He died for us, and, you know, he preached to me, and they were going to have water baptism at Niobrara River in Gordon, Nebraska. So I joined in and I got baptized in water and the Spirit. And I believe that after I got baptized, the Holy Ghost is with me, and He teaches me and He comforts me daily. He heals me and He supplies my needs. And I thank Him. I thank Jesus, and I thank my brother-in-law. He passed away, but he introduced me to Jesus.
I see that God is using them in these last days to teach us about forgiveness, to teach us about coming forth out of shame. And in the land, because they're so tied to the land and been stewards of the land here in North America cannot experience the kind of revival that it needs to experience without the Native Americans. We cannot go around them, we must go through them. And as they're rising up, as they dance their dance, as they put on their regalia and honor Creator for who God has called them to be, that it unlocks something in the atmosphere and it unlocks something in the heavens, and we cannot see real revival until they take their spot at the table with everyone else, until they release their sound. And I believe the heavens open up, and I believe we're going to see healings and the glory of God be released throughout this nation. And I believe it's going to touch the world, because the enemy tried to stop their sound, but in these last days God is releasing their sound, and it's a message of healing, hope, deliverance, and restoration.
Our role is to take one step back and sit down together and say, help us learn how to do the ministry together, doing together what neither one of us, we've not been able to do without you. And in so doing, it has given credence, it's given identity, it's given purpose. For the first time in history, since first contact, Native American people have been able to look us in the eye and call us brother and want to work alongside.
The hardest part of that whole thing is to forgive. And I have learned that if I don't forgive, I'm going to be just as miserable, if not worse. And to try and explain to someone else about how to forgive, I would just have to say that the Creator would want us to forgive Him.
To become truly free is to forgive. The truth of the gospel is that Jesus has said to forgive is the greatest key for us. He said if we do not forgive, that our Father in heaven cannot forgive us. And it's the beginning of a great amount of restoration and healing as people relinquish the right to hate and to be bitter.
Native people, and as a Native leader, and somebody that is recognized as a spiritual leader, even among myself, among my people, that there is a need for each other. Native people need non-Native people, and non-Native people need Native people in order for us to work together in this healthy relationship, this partnership, in order to advance God's kingdom.
We are seeing a generation of young people coming to know the Lord, of taking a stand in very, very difficult times. But then I also see, as far as leadership really beginning to develop. And the question, and again I think of Dr. Graham back in 1975, he made a statement that the Native Americans is like a sleeping giant, and perhaps they would be one of the groups that would really bring the nation to revival.
Our Creator has given Native Americans a very special place as gatekeepers of the land. And as they rise up to their place and their calling, healing will come to this land. There's been a lot of bloodshed, a lot of pain that has gone on for generations. And our Creator, our Father, has a great and awesome plan to change all of that and to bring about health and restoration once again.
God is moving with Native people in a tremendous way. We see a lot of young people that are coming to Christ. In our community, they don't come in big numbers, but we have to look at the victories one at a time, one family at a time.
When we sit with hopeless people and we hear their stories first, and then we tell them ours, that's where we were once. And then you tell them His story about what He did for us, and it bridges that and brings that person that hope.
When we share the hope of the gospel, first of all, it comes out of our own personal relationship with the Lord, where we have found Him to be the answer for me, for my life. I've found Him to be the life changer. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. Now, if He's just a man, that's pretty arrogant. But if He is God, and He says, I am the way, then for us as Native people, the hope, the healing, the forgiveness, all that can release us from our own prisons.